of Fatima. We need to have, in a sense, in the back of our minds, those words we hear from Queen Esther. How can I look upon the destruction that is about to befall my people? 1917, the year the Virgin appeared to the children, was also the year of what was called the Great War. The Great War that was fought under the lie that if we spill enough blood here, we will end war forever. And subsequent history has shown us how well that has worked, hasn't it? Europe is racked with a great destruction overwhelming its people. Millions of lives are slaughtered. Generations are lost on a battlefield. Many not knowing for what it is they are fighting, except that it is for something other than the gospel. Our Lady appears during that war-ravaged era, when much of the world is groaning beneath poverty, and the scourge of violence afflicts all. And yet, in this small, terribly poor place, there's a moment of quiet. Because it's an unimportant corner of Europe, not worth fighting over. And it is here that 3 children beneath the notice of the world are visited by Our Lady. And she comes to them, and as we imagine Our Lady coming to them, we think of the next thing that we associate with Fatima, the message. The message that Our Lady has for the children. But my friends, Our Lady doesn't come with a message. She comes with something greater. And the appearance of Our Lady to the children must not be reduced to a mere message, as if she came bearing information. She came desiring something greater. The words we hear in our first reading are a beautiful clue to this. Note, Queen Esther shows us something important. The true queen, the good queen, is concerned. She is moved, even cut to the heart, concerning the welfare of her people. Can we say any less about Our Lady? Can we say any less about this queen? If Esther could say, how can I look upon the disaster that is about to befall my people? How could this queen who is a mother, say anything less than that? Oh, she comes. She comes with this great concern in her heart, a queenly concern and a motherly concern for the fate and the safety of her people and her children. How can I look upon the destruction of my race, Esther says? Can Our Lady say anything less? Our Lady comes because we, our world, our souls, and our hearts are at risk. And she is concerned. And as she speaks to the children, she does more than show them secrets. She does more than give them a message. Yes, there's a secret. Yes, there is a message. But beneath both, undergirding both, greater than both, as Our Lady comes to give the children something else. She plants in their hearts the same concern she has for her people. This is why Our Lady comes. Not simply to give us a program of action. Not simply to give us indications of what may happen in the future, but to sow the seeds of this queenly, this maternal, this great concern for the welfare of her people. our people, her race, our race, the human race saved by Christ. Our Lady is concerned, and her concern for us brings her to those children. And as she speaks to the children over those months from May to October on the 13th of the month, little by little, we say little by little, but for the children it was greater degrees perhaps than we'll ever experience ourselves. Our Lady doesn't simply unfold a mystery, but she produces a reality within those young lives. A reality that beautifully, when we consider now the children, now when we look upon the children, we see something truly marvelous, truly wonderful. Because each of the children has a very distinct, a very different relationship to Our Lady. And a very different reality is produced in the hearts of each of the three of them. The three children had the same visitor, the same mother, the same queen appears to all. The same words are spoken, but there are three different relationships to this message. And they unfold themselves along the level of Our Lady's concern. We too quickly reduce Fatima to the words of rosary and prayer and reparation. That's all there. The question is, what kind of reparation is it? And again, the clue is the children. The clue is the children. Little Jacinta, she wanted to suffer. Imagine that. She wanted to suffer. But she wanted to suffer for poor, lost souls. Because she loved them and she was concerned that they would be lost. And her suffering of reparation was a suffering of love for those souls. Wounded by sin, lost in sin, swallowed up in a darkness that had claimed them. And she knew that if they wouldn't suffer for themselves, for their own conversion, somebody had to do it. And so she was pleased, delighted to do it. The children, over the months that Our Lady visited them, would often find inconveniences. They would be delighted, saying, "I can suffer something for sinners," Jacinta would say. Note what happens. Our Lady comes because she is concerned. And she speaks to the child, and the child doesn't receive information. The child doesn't simply receive a secret or a message. The child is now concerned. Concerned for those same sinners, saying, "How can I look upon the destruction of my race?" little Jacinta basically says. Because her vision of the lost, her vision of what sin does to us, it didn't so much frighten her for herself, it frightened her for her brothers and sisters. And she wanted nothing but life for them. And so she said, "I will suffer." And then there's Francisco, little Francisco. Francisco, who really didn't hear what Our Lady said, he simply saw her. And he waited for the two girls to tell him what happened. Francisco, who is the child of the eye and not the ear. The child who saw. The child who was captivated by the glory of the sun, which burned his little sister's eyes. The child who was captivated by the glory of God, and who, when he prayed, could not get enough of contemplating and thinking of the glorious face of Christ. The child who was jealous for the glory of God. And this child is touched by Our Lady, and what happens in him? He wants to suffer too. But he wants to suffer because we have dishonored the glorious face of God. We have dishonored the pure and immaculate heart of Our Lady. And this child, who so clearly sees the goodness of God, understands that that goodness must be appreciated. This child, who understands the wonderful love of Our Lady, understands that that love must be valued, esteemed, celebrated, and not neglected. And so here, this child looks at a world that ignores the Lord, that doesn't understand, appreciate, or even receive the goodness that God has. And he says, how can a world choose darkness that way? I will suffer too. But I will suffer that the human heart and the human eye and the human mind can be open to the goodness of God, the glory of God, the greatness of God. This from an ear that didn't hear Our Lady's voice, but a heart that was so sensitive that when he was dying of fever in the hospital and his cousin Lucy visited him, he knew when she had received Holy Communion. So attuned was he to the nearness of that glorious and bright face of Christ. And then there was Lucy. Lucy, who was saddened that she was the last to remain, because she wanted to go home to heaven quickly too. Lucy, who was left to be the voice. Lucy, who was left to tell what had happened, to communicate it to the world, although she wanted to be hidden. Lucy, who suffered in her remaining. Lucy, who lived a long life of penance before she could finally go home. Why? Because Our Lady wanted one behind to continue sowing the seed of her concern in our hearts. Our Lady wanted the truth of this great concern to root itself in our hearts. Fatima has a message, but it has more than that. It has this marvelous disposition of the love of the heart of Our Lady, saying, how can I allow my children to race to their own destruction? How can I look upon the evils they bring down upon their own heads? How can I watch and not be moved? So, she stands before the throne of the King, and she prays for us. And she comes, and she comes. She comes to a world much like that wedding feast. The wine has run out and we don't even know it. She comes because the Lord has sent her. And she finds her servants. And she speaks to them. And Fatima, these 3 shepherd children. And what does she plant in her hearts? This concern for the people of God. This concern for the people her Son has saved. And why does she do that? Because it's the concern of Christ himself. He who refused to merely look upon the destruction of his people, but who came and on the cross took that destruction onto himself and transformed it in his resurrection into victory. He who came that we might not have death, but have the fullness of life. And so Our Lady comes. She comes to their children. And like the great apostolic preachers of old, she gives more than a message. She changes the hearts. And this great love, this great concern is rooted there. But the element, the event of Fatima has these 3 marvelous aspects to it. The word that must be told, and the abiding presence of those who call attention to it. But it has as well the deep concern for sinners. We do reparation for our own sins, but on behalf of the many. On behalf of the many who do not even understand the darkness in which they are trapped. And we do reparation because we finally come to recognize how great and glorious the good Lord who has saved us truly is, and how easy in our own hearts and in the world around us it has become to neglect that glory, to ignore that goodness, to hide it, to neglect it, to take it for granted, to even reject it. We do reparation to repair that wound that we have caused, but we do reparation as well because we want to restore the vision of God to the human heart lost in darkness that desperately needs that light. And we're told that 100 years ago, when the angel came to visit the children 1 year before Our Lady appeared to them, the angel gave them Holy Communion to strengthen them and to get them ready. How good it is then that in this place we'll come forward. And I don't know about Father Roy, but I'm no angel. But we will receive here that same great saving banquet, the bread of angels, the presence of Christ. And let's just have in the back of our mind, it strengthened and prepared the children for that visitation which was to root the great concern of Our Lady for her people in their hearts. And let us ask for that grace from our Savior as we receive him. May we too be truly concerned for ourselves, but also for the many who are lost, foundering. How can we simply look upon the destruction of our race and our people? Rather, let us weep. Let us do penance. But let us always be concerned. Amen.